So how did you initially meet her? That she even
Yeah,
knew that you were getting confirmed, wanted to come, all of that.
right, right. So we had met several years earlier, incidentally, just at the bus stop,
Oh,
because
so cute.
where we lived growing up were two neighborhoods that were adjacent to each other, and so it was my first year of college, and I was riding the city bus for the first year, and she was riding it to get to just her school, her grade school, and it it was pretty much just a like there's the familiar person that always stands at the bus, it was a crowd, right? So it's sort of like, yeah, you sort of acknowledge the people, and that's about as far as the relationship goes, right? But because we were both novices at riding the bus, we didn't understand that seasonally the schedule changes, and the bus that we
Ooh.
both caught, like I could ride the bus all the way from downtown where my college was all the way to my home in the suburbs without ever transferring or anything like that. And
Nice.
same for her from where she got the bus. And so when the fall season had ended and it was going into the winter season, the schedules had changed and neither of us understood that. And so at one of the transfer points, we were supposed to transfer and neither of us knew that. We were just sitting
Oh.
dumb on the bus after everybody had evacuated. And after all the other buses had left, our bus driver comes back on, and he was having a smoke break or something. And he comes back on and he goes, why are you still here? And we're like, well, we're waiting to go. And he's like, no, this is the end of the line for this bus. Haven't you seen the
Oh no.
schedule? And we were both like, oh, okay, great. So we were kind of stranded, and it was about a 30-minute walk home for me, and for her as well, because she lived right by me. So
Well, that's a long
I just
walk.
sort of announced, yeah, a little bit. And I had announced kind of in frustration, well, I'm just going to walk home because I don't know when the next bus is coming. And she sort of like timidly said, can I follow you? Because I don't know how to get home from here. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. And so that was the first time we had a conversation, and yeah, we talked for the duration, and from then on, recognize each other at the bus stop. But then beyond that, it didn't really become anything more than that. And then at the end of that year, my program had ended and I was going into another program after that, and so I had a different bus route, and I was actually moving into the city at the same time, and so um, we had just gone our separate ways and thought nothing more of it. And then a few years later, this was like in the prototype of social media, so like Facebook and that
Yes.
kind of thing didn't exist at the time, but there were, I think it was called MSN groups or something like that. And so there was a group for the town that we lived in. So we live in a big metropolitan area, but the sort of suburban city that we live in that's attached to it is a smaller city, and so it had its own kind of groups, and we just kind of crossed paths there. And I was like, oh yeah, you're the girl from the bus, and vice versa. And so she had added me to, I think it was called, was it Hotmail chat or was it MSN chat or some sort of chat program at the time. I think it was
I
MSN
think I'm
chat.
younger because I remember AOL instant messaging when I was like in middle
Yeah,
school. So this must
it
have
would have
been
been like
before.
that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
I'm in the
we don't
States,
have
so maybe there was
AOL in
something in
Canada.
Canada.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe
yeah,
there's something else in
yeah.
Canada.
There you go. So that was kind of like our point of contact. But the way that if it was MSN chat worked is that you would just sort of log on, and then there'd be like 20 people or however many friends you knew, and random people would just sort of chat you. And so she was
Nice.
kind of like in that roster of people. And then sometimes we would interact, and then other times just not. But that's kind of how we knew each other, and how she knew about my conversion. I think that would come up at times because again, I was an obnoxious convert and always wanted to talk about my faith, and so that would come up at times, and it would be sort of interesting conversation because she didn't know any Christians, right? And so there'd be some curiosity about that.
Wow. She didn't
But
know
then
any Christians?
I don't think so. No. Yeah.
That is amazing.
Canada's a pretty secular place. Yeah, we don't have like a strong evangelical presence. That's a pretty abnormal thing.
Wow. As an
Yeah,
American, that is hard to wrap my mind around. I grew up in Texas
yeah,
in the Bible Belt. I was Protestant, converted to Catholicism. I can't even, wow. You didn't know any
yeah.
Christians. Wow. So I'm sure when you
Not
were
people who
blowing
are
up
serious
this
about
chat.
it.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
So when you
yeah,
were
yeah.
blowing up this chat about this dude Jesus, I'm sure it got her attention because
Right.
she's like, "Oh, I've read
Yeah.
books about that or whatever."
It's an eccentric thing to be a Christian, and to be a young Christian too, right? And a convert. Just
Right.
nobody does that. Yeah. If
Is it
anything, there
still?
might be some people who were raised kind of Christian or in a church tradition, but then as soon as they had enough freedom to evacuate the premises, they would do so. Yeah.
Hello, hello. I am so excited to tell you about a course for people who are discerning marriage. If you are in a serious relationship or if you are engaged, we have an offering for you. This is called Next Step, a course for discerning marriage, and it is based on John Paul II's ideas of what marriage prep should look like in his ideal world. I am so excited to have taken John Paul II's ideas, interspersed them with my marriage counselor practical hat, if you will, the tips that I have to practically live this out. My team and I have put together an incredible resource for you to be able to discern marriage, practically speaking. Please check out Next Step if this is for you, or if you know someone and you love someone who is actively discerning marriage, please consider gifting them Next Step so we can get this in the hands of as many people who are discerning marriage as possible. And so the bulk of your friendship was cultivated on this early social media chat situation where you knew each other from the bus, but you didn't necessarily have an in-person hangout friendship. But she saw you chatting about your conversion. And was it through the messaging app that she was like, can I come to your confirmation?
Oh, okay. I'm trying to remember if that's how she knew about it. It probably was. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I think so. As I was moving out from my parents' house into the city to go to my next college program, I was kind of unloading a bunch of stuff, and one of those things was a snowboard because I had multiple snowboards, and in the new place I was moving to was too small for all my stuff, right? And so I was like, I have to get rid of one of my snowboards. And she had said that she was really interested in learning to snowboard, and so I said, well, I've got a bunch of extra gear. If you want, you can have it. And so that was the first time we'd actually seen each other since riding the bus several years earlier, where I was I just came to her house and I handed off a bunch of this stuff, and then didn't see each other again for a while. And then I had asked her, how's the snowboarding going? And she said, oh, well, I haven't used it at all yet. And I was like, well, why not? And she said, well, I don't have anybody to go with, and I'm afraid to take lessons. And not to brag, but I'm a pretty good snowboarder. So I had said, well, I could take you for a lesson if you want. But I was also getting surgery on my ankle at the time because I was a skateboarder growing up, and I had badly messed up my ankle. And so around Christmas time, I was supposed to get surgery, which was going to cripple me for the better part of the next semester. And so I said, sure, but if we're going to do it, we have to do it right away because I won't be able to snowboard in the next coming months. So that was the first time we'd actually done something together where we went snowboarding together. And I probably had shared with her, because I was in RCIA at that point, and so I probably had shared with her that I'm going to be received into the Catholic Church. But I don't remember making plans or anything like that at that point, because I probably didn't even know what the date was at that point. But we had kept in touch still through chat moving forward. And that's probably when she asked me if she could come was through that, because we still weren't spending time together in person. We'd gone the snowboarding the one time, and then it was just virtual from then on. So yeah, I think it was probably through the chat.
I am dazzled by this story because when you explain that she came to this to your confirmation, this huge Easter vigil, this massive thing, I assumed that there was this foundation of friendship, and no, the Lord just hugged her heart. This is incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we move on to how you guys decided to get into a committed relationship? You said it was a few months later. I'm guessing that kind of spearheaded a friendship that was not so much online, that was more consistent. Okay, so how did you guys decide to start dating?
Well, so we just started hanging out, and I was really used to having female friendships growing up. It's kind of a weird thing. Looking back, not a healthy thing, I would say, right? Because they always blurred the lines between, are we, where's the boundaries in this relationship, right? And it often would create jealousies too if one of us would start dating somebody else, and then you've got this really intimate friendship on the side too, right? So for me, it was a very normal and comfortable thing to just spark up a close friendship with a female. For her, that wasn't normal. For her, that signaled something romantic. And so I think she was interpreting it much more in romantic terms than I was at that point. But things were just very naturally becoming quite intimate, I would say. Not necessarily physically, but just we were spending a lot of exclusive time together because, I didn't have any friends at that point, and neither did she. And so we kind of became our only people to each other. And as it grew more and more intimate, at a certain point, I was especially with the age gap, I was feeling like um, maybe I should stall this at least, or just interrupt it. And so I do remember having the talk with her one night and just sort of saying, it feels like we're moving towards a romantic relationship here, but I don't think we should.
Okay.
And especially because, there was also the disparity in our own ethics, around things like sexuality, for example, right? Like
It's a big deal.
she drew from the wisdom of the world, whereas I was trying
Mm,
to observe Christian ethics, right?
right.
So I didn't know what that would look like if we actually did proceed in a relationship. So for a variety of reasons, I was trying to pump the brakes and just sort of say, I still want to be friends, because again, that was a normal thing for me, but I
Sure.
don't think we should become anything more than that. Um, and so that was my feeble attempt, but really we just kept hanging out,
Sure.
and it didn't slow down, I would say, in terms of the movement towards intimacy. So at a certain point, we kind of revisited it, and I think I just admitted at that point. I was like, yeah, I definitely have feelings for you, um, and I think, and she affirmed the same thing, and so from then on, I would say we were kind of official.
Okay.
So we just, it was more accidental than anything.
And then where did her conversion come in here? Because I'm sure you guys
Yeah.
were talking a
So
lot about it if you were so
yeah. So
passionate.
so yeah, exactly. So we were talking a lot about my faith. She had questions, and like I said, I would answer those questions. And that's one thing I really wasn't prepared for becoming a Christian, was how much opposition I would get for it.
Yeah.
I was overcoming my own opposition was the big hurdle, and then I felt like, okay, well, now this is just who I am, and this is the kind of lifestyle that I'm leading. But I immediately had to contend with objections from friends and family, and philosophical
Mm.
objections too, right? My older brother at the time was kind of going through his own conversion into a kind of like a nihilistic philosophical movement, and
Ooh.
he was throwing all of these philosophical arguments at me that I was unprepared for. And so um, to to manage that, and to be prepared to offer the hope that I had, I started reading apologetics at that point.
Nice.
And so the more I read apologetics, the more I was eager to have those conversations with people, because I felt like really
Sure.
armed to argue people into the faith, right? And so with my, at the time, girlfriend, again, she would ask me these questions, and I was becoming increasingly capable of answering them. But again, the zealotry was suppressed a little bit by, I would describe as grace, and sort of the movement of the Holy Spirit there, to not, you know try to argue her into the faith, but to just
Sure.
simply answer the questions and then offer that invitation. And then simultaneously, when I was so I was still in college at this point. A f- well, and even in the lead up to my own becoming Catholic, I had met some evangelicals. This is kind of a funny story, because you mentioned, it's weird from where you come from for there to be no Christians, but for
Oh yeah.
where I came from, I felt like the only Christian on campus, right? And there was
Wow.
a school newspaper at the time, that people would read, but they would primarily read for the classifieds, because people would always post the weirdest things in this classified section. And I came across something that was, hey, I'm Christian and I haven't met any other Christians, and I'm going to be at this place and time. If you're Christian, would you come and meet with me? And I was like, hey, me too. I'm the only other Christian in my world. So I
Yeah.
came, and there was like 4 people who responded to this, and we were like
Wow.
this
That's
very
it.
lonely, pathetic group of Christians on campus. And I was the only Catholic. The rest were
Wow.
varying degrees of, I think, mostly evangelical, and they all
Okay.
immediately were trying to save me, and inviting me off to their
Of course they
various
were.
like youth groups and young adult groups and things like that. So I reluctantly went along just to be friendly to one of
Sure.
the young adult communities, which was at like a mega church, like a Pentecostal church, and
Wow.
it was amazing, actually. It there was about 1,500 young adults at this thing, whereas like
Whoa.
the Catholic church that I was exploring, I was the only young adult there.
Sure.
Probably the average age was
1,500.
about 50. Yeah, so it
Wow.
was like this. It was a real thing that was going on at this particular church, and the young adult pastor was still, to this day, I consider probably the best preacher slash speaker that I've ever listened to.
High praise.
And he had a very intellectual approach to the faith, which I found very refreshing. You don't typically get that in evangelical churches, at least up here. It tends to be more like encouragement and a little bit
Mhm.
of sort of Bible study, but it's not faith and reason. Certainly, that's not a
Right.
big part of their tradition. Whereas this guy was, he focused a lot on the rational side, and I really appreciated that from where I was. So when my wife and I, or well, at the time my girlfriend, when she had admitted, yeah, I believe in God now, the question for her became, how do I do this? How do I follow Christianity, right? And I said, well, you could come into the Catholic Church, but there's this evangelical church that I had learned about, or I had been exposed to for a time, and I thought it was really good. And it was very much a seeker-oriented church, and so
Mm.
they didn't really go deep, but they were very much about trying to convince you and trying to get you saved. Although they didn't do things like altar calls or anything like that, so
Oh.
it felt very comfortable for someone like her. And I thought this would be a good introduction to like a church context, right? So that's where we went, and so every Sunday I would go to mass. She would sometimes come to mass with me, I think. I was also the praise and worship leader at mass at the time. I was the guitar guy, and so I had a lot of responsibilities at mass. And then afterwards, I would either go pick her up, or if she was already with me, we'd drive all the way to the other side of the metropolitan city to go to this evangelical church, and we'd just we'd come late, like probably 10 or 15 minutes late, because that's as soon as we could get there. But then we'd catch, a little bit of the praise and worship that they had there, which was uh, a very high caliber and something that I appreciated as somebody who was into that. And and then the preaching was, a good half hour, 45 minutes. And and that became very instrumental, I'd say, in helping her grow deeper in an appreciation for what she was doing. And of course, she would start to ask questions of an ecclesiastical nature, like why the Catholic Church versus the others. And again, I was really into apologetics, so I felt equipped to answer those questions. And it didn't take much for her to become convinced that Catholicism was the way to go. And so, not long after that, she entered into RCIA.